Hi everyone, my name's Luisana and I'm here to do a quick tutorial on how to do some paper piecing. To do this tutorial I'm using a pattern that I've gotten from Carol Doak's 50 Fabulous Paper Pieced Stars. In fact, that's what her book looks like, and she has laid them out pretty simply, good instructions, and the pieces are simple and very straightforward, and she names them by the states. I'm actually doing the Colorado star today because it's pretty basic, doesn't have too many components. The first thing you need to know about doing paper piecing is you're going to have a pattern. You can either trace that pattern. I am using some June Taylor foundation paper piecing, and this particular foundation I really like because I can see it from the right side and I can see it from the wrong side. It's pretty transparent. Mostly people print off patterns, so they're going to be doing it on printer paper or copier paper. If you're copying it, it's perfectly fine. Just know that sometimes when you're using that kind of paper piecing, you will need to hold up your pattern to the light from time to time to see if your piece of fabric is going all the way around it. Now, one of the things that I appreciate about the way that she has done her book is that she gives you the measurements for fabric cutting for each of the segments of the stars. A lot of people who do foundation piecing sometimes just do it with I'm just going to see if it covers enough, and as long as it covers enough, then that's good enough for me. And there's plenty of tutorials that take that approach, and it's perfectly fine. I tend to like to measure things out so that I don't have to stop the process once I'm started. Anyway, let's get into this piecing. So the first thing you want to know is the piece that you're looking at when you can read it. So these numbers all look fine. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and they're in the reading orientation. If I flip this over, that's the back side. Clearly, the letters are backwards on this, and that's just fine. When the letters or the numbers are backwards, that's fine. The thing is, you're going to work on the back side to place your fabrics, and you're going to sew on the actual paper itself facing up. So how do I know I've got it right? All right, let's look at section 1. I'm going to flip it over. What I like to do with my placement is I like to put a small dab of glue right on that spot. Not too much. I just use some washable glue on a glue stick. I give it a little dab, and then I place my fabric to cover that section. Now, if I wasn't sure whether it was covering the whole thing, I could take it, hold it up to the light, and see if it covers it all. Because I'm using such a transparent foundation, I know that it does. But that's not always the case. You can't always print on something that's that exact size. The other thing to know about when you place your first piece, and this is only true about your first piece. Your first piece, the right side of the fabric will face up. As you move along, the second piece and all the subsequent pieces will be facing down. In other words, right sides together, just like you would when you were piecing. So I've got my first piece down on the flip side of the paper. I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to look for the next section that I'm going to piece, which is going to be section number 2. And I'm going to sew along that line. I like to take a little piece of template plastic that I've had this for many years. It's kind of yellow, but it has sentimental attachment. And I'm going to place it along that line, and I'm going to go ahead and fold it back along that line. Now, you can use a postcard, a greeting card, anything that's a little bit stiff, just not too thick. Then I'm going to take my add a quarter ruler. An add a quarter ruler has a little lip on it right here along the edge. So that allows me to put it down and kind of snug it up against that vinyl that I have, or the postcard that I have, and do a little trim. Do you need an add a quarter ruler? You do not. A lot of times people just use the regular Omni Grid rulers to do their quarter cuts. Some people just eyeball it and use their scissors. Whichever camp you're in, it's perfectly fine. This makes it very precise to me and very straightforward, and I know I'm always getting it right, so that's just my approach to it. Once I've done my little trim, and I know I'm going to put down my piece 2, I'm going to flip it this direction. So there's my piece 1. Here's my piece 2. It has a right side and a wrong side. I'm going to put my right sides together. Because I've got such a nice straight line there, and I know this is way sufficient to cover a 1/4 inch this way and a 1/4 inch that way, I'm not going to worry too much about whether it's going to fit. I know it is. I'm going to flip it over, take it to my sewing machine, and I'm going to stitch along the line between 1 and 2. I like to stitch a little bit on the outside, about a 1/4 inch, and I'm going to go ahead and do that stitching. Now, one additional thing to know is you're going to want to reduce your stitch length. You want the stitch length to create a perforated line along that foundation, and the closer they are, the easier it is to tear the paper out when you're finally getting to that point where you want to remove the foundation. So you're going to take that stitch down. I set mine at 1.5. That's kind of where I like it, but it helps perforate it, keep it nice and sturdy. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch along that line. Now, when I approach the end, there's another line that's crossing over. I'm going to go a couple of stitches in over that line, just a few, nothing major, and I'm going to go ahead and cut. I pull that out, and now here I take it and just do a little finger press, push it over. Sometimes people like to iron in between. For this particular one, it's pretty straightforward. There's not too many pieces coming together. I'm just going to give it a little finger press. Then flip it back over to the right side. My next line that I'm going to sew on is between 1 and 3. So there's 1, 2. So this is the next line to section 3. I'm going to go ahead and take that, add this little piece of vinyl that I like, set it up against the line, fold it over, take my add a quarter, line it up, zip off that extra fabric. Flip it back over, grab my next piece. Again, I know that this is going to be adequate. I'm going to just set it up against there. It goes a 1/4 inch that way, more than that I need on that side. Hold it in place, flip it over, and stitch on that line. Line number 3. I like to stitch towards the outside. There we go. Cut. Flip it over. Finger press. Next line I need to sew is for piece number 4, and it's this line right here. Take my card, pull it over. Now, one of the things, remember, I stitch a little bit into there. It's pulling, no problem. Just give it a little gentle little pull on that to flatten it. Go ahead and put my add a quarter. Zip it off. Don't need those pieces anymore. Flip it back over. And I'm going to grab another piece of fabric. Remember, I pre-cut these, so I know that they work. There we go. Oops. I don't need to take my cutting mat with me. Flip it over. Now, if you have a lot of pieces that you're working with, One of the things that I like to do is just organize those pieces in nice little stacks on my table so I can just grab them. Little sections, you know. These are all my section 1s, these are all my section 2s, especially if they're all the same color. Okay, fold it back, flip it over. The next item line to sew is to point number 5, and that's between here and here. So I'm going to go ahead, take my little card, sew it over. Again, I have this little piece here, just give a little tug. It's fine. Take my add a quarter, bump it up against there, and zip off those pieces. Now, on this star, this piece right here has an angle to it, right? It's a bit of a triangle right here. So I have cut pieces that started out as squares, and I cut them in half. And so now I've got this triangle. I want to make sure that I lay it properly, right? So it can't go this way, that won't cover it, right? Can't go that way, that won't cover it. So I'm going to go ahead and look at it and say, which way is it going to be covered? Well, it's going to go like that. Now, this is pretty straightforward on this particular pattern. Sometimes you get into long pieces or long triangular, odd-shaped pieces, and so you want to make sure that that you've got the correct angles in place. I'm going to flip this way, right sides together. Go. There I have that. And then the next piece is going to be piece number 6. And I probably went over more than I needed to there. Doesn't matter. There's my line right there. I'm going to pull it back. Just give a gentle tug to those little pieces. I add a quarter on there. Now, I'm using a very tiny cutting board so that I could stay in the camera. Oh. There we go. Trim that up. Now again, I've got one of these angles here, so I'm gonna flip it this way, grab the piece that I need, make sure that I know which direction I need to lay it. It's going to be that way. That's the direction I need to lay it. Right sides together. Right there. Grab it. Flip it over, I know that it more than enough covers. I'm trying to make sure that on the outside of this, when I trim it, I'll have a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. Now, at this point, I take this to my ironing board and give it a quick press. I'm going to take my regular ruler now, and flip this over. Now, here's an important thing. On these patterns, on this pattern, she has a solid line around there. That is a stitching line. That's where you're sewing on all the solid lines. When I put this together, that'll be the line I sew on. So I need to make sure that I have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to put down my regular ruler here, and I'm going to cut a 1/4 inch around. Turn it to the side and just be very good about cutting a 1/4 inch away from that solid line. I have cut off my seam allowance before, and that's never any fun because that means I have to redo the piece, because there's no getting away from that. Once you've cut away your seam allowance, you're kind of in a pickle. Okay. Now what's interesting is you can see here on the bottom, this little tip here isn't covered. That's okay. That's going to be caught up in the seam allowance. So let's put it together with another section. This section is a section that is going to be joined with this particular piece. It actually gets joined like that. When I join my pieces together, I'm going to flip them together. I'm going to use those lines, those sewing lines. That's where I want to sew on. I got to line those up. And what I like to do is take a nice thin straight pin and poke it through that corner hole. And I want to make sure when I go to the other side that it's poked through. So I've got it matched. So I'm going to go ahead and poke that one through. I'm just going to kind of do that. Then I go to the other side, flatten those little tips up, right? Flatten those little pieces up like that. Take a nice thin pin, poke it through so that it, oops, that's off, so that's not going to work. I want to make sure that they are all lined up together. Poke it through, and there, I got it to the right spot. And go ahead and pin that. And then I like to do just a couple more, making sure that on the sewing line, I'm going from this side to that side, right on that sewing line. I don't want to deform anything. Come over here. I like to use really thin pins for this. There we go. Now I'm going to sew right there. 1/4 inch. Now I take this out as I go. And I'm sewing right along that solid line. Go ahead and open it up. Smooth it out. And there you can see that I've done a pretty good job getting that all matched up. Now, if I flip it over, I've got a little bit of a bulky seam here because of the nature of it. What I'll do is I'll tear that paper out. I won't tear all of it out. I don't want to tear this out until I've actually sewed this piece to my final widths. But if these are along the seam, I will tear these out. You can see it's like a perforated thing to tear out. It's kind of fun actually. Go ahead and tear those out. Yeah. And sometimes if you have any trouble getting a little piece out, sometimes I take a little tweezers to get them out. Flip it over this way, tear that out. And you can actually iron these seams open. I don't iron these seams to one side. I iron them open to flatten out some of the bulkier sections. You know, I will iron this open to take some of that bulk out of that section. I'll go ahead and I'll iron it open on the ironing board. I'll leave these outside pieces because I still want those lines to match up with the other sections that I'm joining. Ultimately, you can see here my section 2. It's not really on the edges. I could actually take this one out. One of the things I like to use is this purple thing and just sort of tear that out. I find this to be, I don't know, kind of relaxing. I don't really mind doing it. Just kind of pull it out. And just kind of take those pieces out. And that's it. Now you've got those sections all done. And you just, you know, sometimes I just wait till the whole thing is put together before I tear anything out. I just want to show you how that perforation just kind of is very forgiving. Ultimately, here's what it's going to look like. Let's see if I can get my other pieces here. This is the star that we are going to be putting together. Here is the star. And I will sew those all together. And there is, once they get all put together, that's what the star is kind of going to look like. And there you have it. Paper piecing. Easy peasy. Bye.